Justice Stras, I want everybody, you especially, to understand that my objection here was not at all about you personally. I enjoyed meeting you. There are friends from Minnesota Jewish community here who are my close friends. I just want to talk a little bit about this process and the nomination process, because even setting aside your own record, you do not come to this committee as a blank slate. During the presidential campaign, then candidate Trump proudly declared that he would, quote, appoint judges very much in the mold of Justice Scalia, and said that, quote, the justices I'm going to appoint will be pro-life. They will have a conservative bent. And to make certain that his nominees would expect views, then candidate Trump outsourced the job of identifying them to the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation. These are deeply conservative interest groups. And those groups produced a list of conservative judges for then candidate Trump to consider naming to the Supreme Court, a list that included you. These groups have very well-defined views on issues like affirmative action, which I just, and we talked about school integration or reproductive rights. And I'm confident they would not have included you on the list of potential Supreme Court nominees if your views on those issues were not known to them. It concerns me that the Heritage Foundation seem to have more insight, must have more insight into your views and philosophy than the American people do by virtue of this hearing. And, the groups picking the judges, they know what they're getting. But the public doesn't. And I just don't think that. I'd just like to talk about the process that led to your nomination. In your committee questionnaire, you wrote that Republican members of Minnesota's congressional delegation contacted you about the position in January. Then in February, you communicated with an official in the White House. Who was that official?
As I recall, the official I first communicated with was Mr. Katz's Deputy White House Counsel.
Okay. Did you discuss the Eighth Circuit vacancy?
Don't recall doing so. I will say that I have a number of friends within the Federalist Society, and I don't recall any specific conversations we had. Whether or not we've talked about it indirectly at some point in time or informally, I can't remember doing so.
Okay, so you don't recall. In May 2016, then candidate Trump released that list of potential Supreme Court nominees. That list was created for him by the Federalist Society and Heritage Foundation. And a spokesman said that for the Minnesota Supreme Court later said that you, quote, had been unaware of the list until it was reported in the media. I understand that you were unaware of that particular list, but did you discuss the possibility that President Trump or then nominee Trump might nominate you to the Supreme Court with members of the Trump campaign or the transition team?
No, I did not, Senator. The first I learned of that was the day it came out, and I actually learned about it from a press report that was issued that day.
You're a relatively young man. I believe you're 43. If you were someday elevated to the Supreme Court, you'd be well positioned to influence the direction of the court for decades to come. So you can see why your nomination would appeal to the conservative legal movement. Have you ever discussed the possibility that President Trump would nominate you to the Supreme Court with the Heritage Foundation or the Federalist Society? Have you discussed that possibility with Leonard Leo?
I don't believe so, no. Again, I've had informal conversations, but I've never discussed that with Leonard Leo, and I don't recall discussing that with anyone from Heritage or the Federalist Society.
And have you at any time said to anyone that the first chosen for the Supreme Court if you become the circuit court judge and a federal circuit court judge on the Eighth Circuit?
I have not. I have not had anyone discuss that with me, and I've made promises to no one on how I would rule. So I've had no discussions of that kind, even as an Eighth Circuit judge.
I understand. Okay, thank you, and thank you both, and thank your families for hanging in there. Thank you, Justice Stras. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr.